Welcome to the AX interview series. Today we are lucky enough to have Ann Winblad with us. Ann is one of the most successful and experienced entrepreneurial investors and entrepreneurs in the software industry. Today she's going to talk to us about her experiences, and we're going to begin by asking Ann about your background. How did you get started towards entrepreneurship, and were there early indications that you were going to be an entrepreneur?
Well, when I became an entrepreneur, people didn't really use the term entrepreneur. It's become a very important term in the global economy now. Warren Buffett likes to say that if people want to be entrepreneurs, they should get their start being a paper boy, because they have to manage their own route, they have to deliver a product to someone, they have to have horrible hours to be a paper boy. Well, I wasn't a paper boy, but I did need to make money. I grew up in a small town, Farmington, Minnesota. My dad was a high school basketball coach, my mom a nurse, the oldest of 6 kids. So if we wanted to go to the movies, we had to earn the money ourselves. And I was fortunate that when I was a young girl, Barbie dolls came along. And they're really an enormous business. They're still around today, where they sell you a doll and then you go buy more clothes and houses and whatever. Well, I got the doll and nothing else. So I taught myself how to sew. I went down to the local clothing store where they also sold fabric and begged for the ends of bolts of fabric, which the store owner gave me. I sewed my own Barbie doll clothes and I sold them. And I made a bunch of money as a 9-year-old, and I became a very good seamstress as a result. So I think entrepreneurs start by figuring things out. And either for a passion about something, and I have to say I wasn't that passionate about that Barbie doll, but I got really passionate about sewing those clothes. And I earned quite a bit of movie money, enough that I could take a friend or two to the movies with me, and we were fortunate that in Farmington, Minnesota, while we did not have a stoplight, we had a theater.
Now, how did you get from Barbie dolls and Barbie doll clothes to large-scale accounting systems and large-scale accounting software?
Well, I really got to computer science and learning how to code. As an undergraduate student at St. Catherine's University, they had a J-term or interim class on Fortran, on coding. And it was another twist of fate. I took the class, I was a math major and a business major, and I was taking all my math classes and business classes at St. Thomas. And that programming class, the nun who was teaching it, was on deck, mini computers, got ill, and somehow I was appointed to finish teaching the class. It was probably pretty scary for the rest of the students, but I had to learn very, very, very fast. And that taught me 2 things. 1, how much I love programming, and 2 is that anything you do is about teaching as well. St. Thomas at the time received an endowment from Control Data and ended up having tons of computers here. And so I took all the quantitative methods classes at St. Thomas. They required all the business students to take a programming class. I was the only woman in the business major. I wrote all those programs for the class, my graduating class. They typed my papers in turn. So I became quite a good coder, and I also still was a business person. If I'm coding for you, you type for me. When I graduated, I got a very, very good job at the Federal Reserve Bank here in Minneapolis. It's a very big bank, as a grade 10 systems analyst. They had never hired an undergraduate student before. I was the first one. So I had to learn yet more programming languages and more computers. But I found that job not as thrilling as it could be. So after 13 months, still some student loans left, and leaving behind a salary that was now larger than my father's, who had his master's degree from St. Thomas, I started my own software company.
Now, how did you spot the idea, or what motivated the starting of the software company? Part of it clearly the desire to do something beyond the job, but what was the opportunity? How did you spot the opportunity that became the foundation?
Well, the opportunity was one of those times in history where everything is a green field. And as an investor, we look for greenfield opportunities, meaning that nothing's on the field other than green grass, houses, nothing. It's yours to build out against a beautiful, pure landscape. And that pure landscape was the beginning of the PC software industry. Personal computers were just starting in 1975. And at that point in time, we had just brought the first personal computers into the Federal Reserve Bank. So a gap was closed for entrepreneurs.
Z80, if I remember correctly.
Well, these were early Intel machines in 75, so they were 8080s.
Okay.
The Z80 came a little bit later. But what that meant is it closed an economic gap for entrepreneurs. Suddenly, the computing resources were not mainframes or mini computers. They were almost affordable personal computers. So you could get the resources you needed to use only your time and your brains and your ability to convince other people to use their time and brains to write code. And that put a business within grasp for me. I convinced 3 programmers from the Federal Reserve Bank to jump ship with me. 2 took a year sabbatical and never came back. And we then looked at that green field and said, what do we know? Having been a business major from St. Thomas, I was very good at accounting as well as math. And I had this part-time job at Cliff's Hardware down the street where I did their accounting, and it was all paper and pencil. Fortunately with erasers for me as an early accounting student. And we said we could do accounting. So we actually took my St. Thomas textbook, Pile and White, Accounting 101, opened it to page 1, and wrote the programs to automate a full-blown accounting system to the end of that textbook.
Now, how did you then reach the market? I'm always interested because we see problems, we see solutions, but there's this other step of actually finding ways to reach the market and to grow the venture.
Well, you've hit on 2 important things. One is you have to find markets. As a venture capitalist today, we have to fund companies in big markets because they're not ever as pure as you think, and competitors do zoom into big opportunities. If you want to build a small business, you might pick a smaller market, but markets come first. It's not worth building a product unless you know that there is an opportunity. And then what are the economics of getting to the customer? Here again, I was very fortunate. And I know you have some background in this as well. Instantaneous to the creation of these computers, distribution mechanisms came about. One was people were always selling these larger computers through what was called dealer networks. Sets of people who had the assets to buy the computers, resell them to others, go in and train people on them. That same dealer network for the bigger computers jumped on the smaller ones. That was our first route to the customer through these dealer networks. Almost immediately after that, computer retail stores came about. They were called Computerland and Businessland. And they said if you put your computers in boxes, nice pretty boxes, we'll sell them like cereal in our retail stores. The dealers was more economical for us, as we didn't need the pretty boxes, we just needed documentation, and we could train all the dealers at the same time, and then they could fan out and train their customers. The second one required more resources. Unfortunately, we were more successful. We had grown in our revenue by that time, so we could afford having our own warehouse where we did pick, pack, and ship and boxing, our own designers of the boxes. They were still not that great, but they at least looked like cereal boxes. And we could send those out to the distribution centers once we got contracts with the major computer stores, which we did.
Now, did you have mentors during this time, and were there people that helped you, guide you through, and provide you some insights?
You know, mentors are a term that's also pretty new in this industry. What you really want to make sure is that you're in a very, very strong feedback loop. It was so new, no one knew what we were talking about. Software as an industry was very nascent. And so there wasn't really anyone to talk about. No one in my family had ever started a business, at least that was alive. And people were, you know, the highest earning relative I had was an architect, and he worked for an architectural firm, which somebody started that business. When we got started, Don Nyrob was the president of Northwest Airlines here, and his daughter lived down the street from me, and she worked at a bank. I think it was First Minneapolis. And she was the closest to an entrepreneur because Dawn was running Northwest Airlines. So I remembered knocking on her door and saying, how do I start a business? What do I do? There was not a class at St. Thomas on how to start a business. The assumption was everyone would be hired by a business, not that anyone would start one. And she said, gee, I don't know, let's figure this out together. So Nancy Nyrop was my first helper. After that, I just dove into it, and as did everyone else in my company. And it was really like a group grope in the early PC software industry. Everybody made a lot of mistakes, but everybody told everybody what mistakes they made so we could all self-correct at the same time.
Were there some key customers that were the kinds of users that gave you a lot of information and feedback when you talk about closing the loop?
Yeah.
So were there some?
Certainly if you deal with someone who's going to resell your product, they want to make sure that what they deliver to their customer is great. And we sold through a dealer network called CADO, C-A-D-O, and they were based in Torrance, California. And George Ryan, this kind of spunky Irish guy, was the guy who ran the company. It was funded by Sequoia Capital, then the largest venture capital company in the world. Still today it might be. And Mr. Ryan was constantly telling me, Ann, you know, just be more authoritative. One of the things he said to me in the first dealer meeting is it was in his warehouse in Torrance, California. They were manufacturing 8080 new Intel computers called CADO, Computer Assisted Document Originators. And, you know, they were PCs, much like the PCs we use today. And I had to talk to 100 dealers. And I'm kind of short. You probably can't tell by sitting here, but I'm only 5'2" and 3/4. And so I had to stand on a soapbox behind the podium. I remember getting my speech all memorized and tell them how our general ledger worked and how accounts payable worked, how these pieces would work on their computer, how they should price them to sell them. And I'm in my 20s, and everyone there is in their 50s. And George Ryan came up and said, Ann, we're going to take a break now. Come on down off that soapbox. And he said to me, Ann, if you're going to run with the big dogs, you're going to have to learn how to lift your leg. Go back up there. And what he meant is, you know, they're buying your product. They're buying it from you. They need you. They need your product. You're the lead dog right now, so act like the lead dog. You know, take leadership amongst those dealers. It was a seminal moment for me in really saying, hey, you know, the new business could be as important to people as people that have been in business for centuries. You know, when you're 20 and someone's 50, they seem like they're centuries old, and you feel like you are the new person.
How important is that sense of confidence when you're evaluating entrepreneurs and ventures today? So that you've talked about just a minute ago.
We look for leaders, even companies that are started by two engineers, where the engineer may not over time be the CEO. The day we fund them, they are the CEO. They're running the company. They have to be able to have very good communication skills. They need to communicate not just their product, but their mission, especially to developers and computer programmers. They don't sign on for money, they sign on for mission. They want to save the world. When I went to subsequent meetings, I had a little ABBA tape I would play in my car. Now I would probably play it off of Spotify or Pandora. And it was the song, Take a Chance on Me. And I used to sit outside those large buildings and listen to that song, Take a Chance on Me. And because that's what I was asking people to do. And I look for that entrepreneur to be in their head saying, take a risk with me. You can take that risk with me. I know it's a risk. I know there is risk, but I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to be a perpetual learner. I'm going to have the intellectual and physical stamina to get this done. I believe, but I know that I will make mistakes. So this is what I look for, is not just a whole lot of self-confidence and, you know, sort of I'm full of myself, but I know I can figure it out. I know there's an opportunity here. I know I'll make mistakes, but I know I can succeed.
So how did you let's move the story forward. How did you make the transition from the accounting software open systems, if I remember correctly, to Hummer Winblad, one of the more successful venture operations in the Silicon Valley?
Well, there was a middle time. Our company was very successful and very profitable here in Minneapolis. I traveled all over the world with our customers, with our product, and with the industry. And in about 5.5 years, we kept getting offers to have our company be purchased. By that time, two things had happened. One is I discovered winter was actually optional. And two, I discovered that option's pretty expensive to take. And this is a wonderful place to live, a great place to grow up, and it's a lot more economical than San Francisco, New York, Paris, London, even Berlin, places that are big software capitals. So we took one of the offers to sell the company. I signed on, the company was in Dallas, that I would stay until I helped them recruit a new CEO. And I did that rather quickly in about 6 months. So after 6 years from walking out the door of the Federal Reserve Bank without any money, I sold the company and I could afford to move to California, which I did. I spent about a year. I wrote a textbook on object-oriented software. And then I did consulting for larger companies, Pricewaterhouse, IBM, and others, Microsoft. So I could have a broader platform of understanding of software versus just my ERP software and accounting software. And while I was doing that, venture capitalists kept calling me up and saying, hey, my software company that I invested in, it's not working. What's wrong with it? And remember, it's called Silicon Valley, not Software Valley. So software investments were brand new at this point in time. And one of those investors is my current business partner, one of my current business partners, John Hummer. And John said, look, I want to leave my venture firm that does silicon and software and do just software. Would you be my partner? And I said, absolutely not. These venture capitalists don't know anything about software. And who needs money as a software company? Because the software industry is small. At that point in time, Microsoft had taken only $1 million of capital just for safety and put it in the bank. No software company had yet hit $100 million in revenue. Microsoft was about to do that. So people didn't really think of this as a industry needing capital. And John said, it will. John was, very prescient about, what would happen in the software industry. He said, look, over time there'll be more companies, they will need venture capital, and we should start now. And John stalked me for about a year to convince me to become a venture capitalist. And finally I acquiesced. John's 6'10". He grew up in DC, Washington, DC, was a first-round draft pick out of Princeton in the NBA, and then got his master's at Stanford. So he has more of the pedigree of a venture capitalist than I do. So that's how that happened. And we started Hummer Winblad Venture Partners in 1989. It was our first investment.
Okay. What are some of the make or break moments as you're building open systems or you're going through and starting up and building Hummer Winblad? Were there some moments that were really kind of defining moments?
Oh yeah, as an entrepreneur, there's always a moment where you're going to run out of cash. And no matter how well you do planning early on, it's all based on assumptions. So you don't have very many fact cards. And it might be perfect, but unlikely. For us, we needed to buy more computers for our developers. And a PC at that time cost $25,000. And we had been getting time from one of the dealers to use the computers at night. And because of an issue with one of our programmers, which is a story in itself, which we won't go into, we no longer had access to those. So we had to buy our own computers. We didn't have $75,000 extra to buy those computers. So there were 10 banks in Minnesota, and I went to 8 of them and said, could I borrow $75,000? I had no collateral. We were operating out of my apartment, which had 5 bedrooms, which were all offices at this point in time. I slept in my office bedroom. And I had a car loan and student loans. So I was a collateral risk. I had taken here an acting class at St. Catherine's as an undergrad. And it was a really great class. In one class, we had to learn how to cry on command. And by bank 8, I knew exactly when the guy was going to say no. He would lower his head, and the words no would come out. So at bank number 9, I had one bank left in this whole venue. The banker started lowering his head, and I burst into tears. I walked out of that bank with a loan for $75,000 just so I would stop crying. But you don't have to cry for money, but you're going to have to find resources you don't have. Mm-hmm. That always happens. When we started Hummer Winblad, after John finally got me to say yes to be his partner for a software-only venture firm, we had 133 meetings with institutional investors to fund us. My track record was fantastic as a software pioneer. John had a great track record as a young venture capitalist, but people thought investing in software was the silliest thing they'd ever heard. So we got 133 no's before 2 limited partners, 3M and IBM, said yes to us. And then it was a domino theory. We got tons of yeses. Mm-hmm. So get used to no.
So as you think back, what are some of the lessons for students? If you're talking to the people starting out and thinking about it, and some of the folks that I see in class all the time, what are the lessons for them?
Well, you should learn everything you can in class, but you need to really have entrepreneurs talk to you. Because the stories they tell, we call them creation myths. It all sounds perfect. It sounds like I learned a lot. I went out there, came up with a great product. The market was just waiting for me, and now I'm a billionaire or some sort of zillionaire. Mm-hmm. But in reality, there are a lot of things that happen along the way. Even in the case method, you learn exactly what went wrong, but the dynamics are much tougher than that. Agility is one thing you have to learn. There's a lot thrown at you. How do you deal with multiple failure points simultaneously, even multiple success points simultaneously? Mm-hmm. And really having face-to-face with experienced entrepreneurs, because there are a lot these days, is your best learning. Mm-hmm. And getting those in the classroom is really important as well. I, in 1 year, probably visit 10 universities. And I'm brought in with a topic to say, well, we just had a semester on this. What really happens? Because what really happens, you can't anticipate. I would be a capitalist versus a venture capitalist if I knew all the answers. Mm-hmm. But even now, the dynamics of change and innovation are such that you shake things up, and it shakes you up at the same time.
What makes, in your mind, you've given one of them, but what makes a good entrepreneur? When you really start thinking about the people you've invested in and begin to take apart the successes from the failures, from the sideways, are there characteristics that kind of draw out?
Yeah, there are 3 that I look for, and I see. One is enormous intellectual stamina. And that means you want to learn all the time, that you don't stand in place. You say, okay, what don't I know? I know this, I have some wisdom, what don't I know? Number 2 is really, really having belief in a mission. Not just a product, but a mission. Then the ability to actually think about the horizon while executing pinpoint in real time. That is really hard. Some entrepreneurs get stuck in the details. Some of them can't handle the details. But you really have to say, where am I going? What's my mission? What's my goal? That's the only way people come and work for you, the only way that you stay on track with the details. And then how do I keep all the moving pieces together while keeping track of the horizon?
Now, as you think through, again, your experience as an investor and your experience as an entrepreneur, what's the difference between a good business and a good startup and a venture-backed quality business? I get this from students all the time. There are a lot of great businesses out there, but venture investing and venture-backed businesses are a fairly specific breed, aren't they?
Well, lots of people come to us and pitch a product, and I've seen some amazing products, but I have to fund a business. Now, what's changed since I became a venture capitalist in the early 90s is that there are professional seed investors now. And seed investors are very interested in products because they think businesses can be built around them if they can give you just enough cash to get a good product out. So we get to see products more fully built now because of the professionalism of the seed thing. But we want to say, how are you going to build a business out of this? How are you going to get to your first 10 million, then 100 million, then maybe $1 billion? And we know it's all going to be assumptions, but we want people to think out some business assumptions of scale. Mm-hmm. We look at those assumptions all the time and say, well, do we have a fact card? And the reason I'm called a venture capitalist is sometimes all the assumptions about growth are changed and you still get growth. Sometimes they're completely wrong and you don't get growth. Mm-hmm. And you end up with a small product company. And then our goal is to find a home in a larger company for the small product company. If I knew how to make every product into a large company, again, I'd just be a capitalist. So stay tuned, I'm waiting for that.
Gee, it's not a sure thing, huh?
No, it's not a sure thing. Gee, not.
And do you have a motto? Do you have a saying that is useful for entrepreneurs?
Well, I don't have a saying, but Pascal said, chance benefits the prepared mind. And I think you can always have a prepared mind. And then my father, who is a very successful athlete and coach, took 3 teams to the state tournament here in Minnesota. He didn't speak Latin, so he didn't say carpe diem. He said, pack it in. Each day has to be packed in and filled. And that means that you can always do more than you think. It's very fatiguing, so physical stamina is part of being an entrepreneur as well. But you can always do more for your company. You can always do more for your colleagues. You can always do more for your industry. You can always do more for your university. And I think that's a really important thing as entrepreneurs grow their businesses. It's become a motto of Silicon Valley. If you're successful, help others be successful. Entrepreneurs fund the other entrepreneurs there. Entrepreneurs participate in social causes and nonprofits. Entrepreneurs go back to universities and guest lecture at classes. And that's become my motto as well, is pack it in means give.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. There's a lot for the students and a lot for the people who see this to look over and think about, and I really, really appreciate it.
And thanks for your series. I think it's great that you're bringing the voice of experience, both our successes and our failures, in front of those who want to be the entrepreneurs and leaders of the future.
No, thank you.